So Garfield is asking, in Ezekiel 28:11-19, is Ezekiel lamenting against the king of Tyrus or against Satan?
I love this question, Garfield. Really great. And I know there's a little bit of scholarly debate on this one. So I'll just say right off, okay, a conclusive answer is not something that we're going to find. So it takes a little bit of faith. And so my understanding of who it is, I believe, yes, it is Satan, but there is some very reasonable room for a little bit of disagreement on there. But even if it's not Satan, I think a lot of people agree that it could be, let's say, someone who might be under his authority. It says if we believe Satan to be the being who's the head of the demonic forces, the forces of darkness, then this would be a being under him. If you're one who follows Michael Heiser does not believe that when the Bible's talking about Satan, that there is one particular being who is the person referred to Satan every single time it occurs. So he would say in Ezekiel 28 that this is not the Satan, the one and only Satan that most Christians think of when they think of Satan. So just saying that out there. But I'll explain to you now why I believe it is the Satan. And to be clear, Satan is not a name. It is more like a description of who he is. It is the person who is the accuser, who is the enemy, sort of the bad one. If you think of like Lord of the Rings, sort of the Sauron, but it would be he who shall remain nameless, and you don't want to use his name. He's so wicked. Like, let's not even use his name. Just give him a title, the evil one. That's kind of the gist of what Satan means, or Hasatan, the Satan. Let's take a look first at the verse that Garfield mentioned, and that is Ezekiel 28. Now, it's interesting because the Ezekiel 28 starts off with speaking to the prince of Tyre, or like the little ruler of Tyre. And it's clear when it's speaking of the prince, it's speaking of a man. For example, it says, because your heart is lifted up and you say, I am a God, I sit in the seats of God in the midst of the seas, yet you are a man and not a God, though you set your heart as the heart of a God. So this prince of Tyre is being criticized for elevating himself to the point of being a divine being, when God's saying you're not a divine being, you are just a man. Now, if we keep reading, we get to verse 11, and now it talks about God instructing Ezekiel to take up a lament to the king of Tyre. So now we've upgraded from the prince of Tyre to speaking to the king of Tyre. And this sort of fits into this bigger picture that we often talk about here, where we tend to think in terms of the rulers of the world and think they're people, but in fact, behind the people, behind the rulers of the world, is this other layer of leadership, which is really Satan and his demonic forces controlling and influencing everybody. So even behind the prince of Tyre, there's a king of Tyre, a divine being behind him. And this could be more metaphorical. It might not literally be talking about Tyre, the literal king of Tyre. It could be talking more about just Tyre being sort of like the rebellion against God. And we had another verse earlier where we're talking about how there was a verse to Nineveh. And it was clear in that verse that wasn't talking about literally just literal Nineveh, like Jonah spoke to Nineveh. It was talking about more the wickedness, just like how Revelation talks about Babylon. It's not talking about literal Babylon. It's talking about the rebellion against God. Same, I believe it's the same thing here. Not talking about literal Tyre, more it's about the greater rebellion. But even if it's literal Tyre, it still works. It still could be the divine being who is behind the leadership of Tyre. And God then goes on to say, thus says the Lord, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and beauty, and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was covering you. The sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold. And if anybody knows those things, they recognize, wait, that's the same gems that the high priest was called to wear, the Israelite high priest. And he wore lots of gold too. The verse goes on to say, the workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. So also a very musically talented being. It says, you were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you, and you were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways till the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. So right here, it's clear this being was very close to God, was in the presence of God. In fact, if it was covering cherub, might be one who actually physically would stand around God, almost like a honor guard. So very close being, and probably one of the highest of the divine beings, if not the highest, let's say, of the divine beings. But the story doesn't end there, right? We know this being doesn't stay in that place. Verse 16 says, by the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore, and notice it says this, you became filled with violence. Now, if we flash forward to Jesus, Jesus talks about how Satan was a murderer from the beginning. And so we see a lot of these parallels between what we're seeing here and what we hear elsewhere about Satan. Verse 16 going on says, therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God. So gets cast out, is evicted from heaven. And then it says, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub. Now this is a little bit confusing because you're probably thinking like, okay, well now this being has been destroyed, but this is a lament. So it's almost like God saying, hey, Ezekiel, I want you to write the obituary of someone that I'm later going to destroy. That's the idea. So this is the future. This is the obituary of someone that God is going to destroy in the future. They're not destroyed yet, but God's sort of giving you the story of how it's going to happen. Now they have been destroyed. They're going to be destroyed in the lake of fire, which, by the way, Revelation 20 talks about how Satan and the beast and all these things get tossed into the lake of fire and are destroyed. Revelation 12:9 connects with this idea of being cast out of heaven. It says, so the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast out to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Fits very perfectly with what's going on in Ezekiel. Now, people like Michael Heiser, I think, is more open-minded than most people, but he's saying like, hey, there's a lot of scholars who have a problem with this concept of saying Satan was the one who was cast out, because that's not what Ezekiel says. And Ezekiel's not that specific. And they want to make it sound like John the Revelator just sort of makes up for the first time ever that Satan is the one who gets cast out. And Satan, for the first time, says Satan is the dragon of old. For the first time, it says Satan is the serpent and all that in Eden. Where again, we heard the Eden language also used in the context of Ezekiel. So we see tons of these parallels that connect with Satan, the way Satan is described, even how Jesus describes Satan. So I think a lot of scholars are so quick to blind themselves and want to be overly critical, not realize that, okay, there could, even if Ezekiel doesn't fully understand what he's speaking here, from, it doesn't fully understand the vision God is giving him, that doesn't mean that later on God will give more revelation. Like, we know God revelation is progressive, and the New Testament is giving greater revelation, is expounding more on what's in the Old Testament, and the foundation, some of the foundation of that is what's here in Ezekiel. And of course, it's not just Satan who's thrown out, right? It's talked about how a third of the angels were thrown out. This is also consistent with what Jude says. Jude 1:6 says, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under the darkness of judgment of the great day. So the angels are cast down. They're sort of stuck on earth right now, the evil angels, awaiting the day of judgment when they will be destroyed in the lake of fire. As we have mentioned, Satan's going to be destroyed in it by fire, as Ezekiel said, and so will these angels. And it might be different than just being tossed in lake of fire. Also, maybe fire will consume them from within, which is an interesting concept that Ezekiel touches on there. This idea about the leadership being these divine beings on earth, the cast out demons. This again is we refer often to Job and how Satan is one walking to and fro throughout the world, and he shows up to this meeting of the sons of God. He's not listed as being one of the sons of God. It says the sons of God came to the presence of God, and then Satan came also. But it's like you have the rulers of all the different planets coming, or the representatives of the planets, and Satan it gets to be the boss of Earth now because Adam and Eve ceded their leadership claim to Satan. They sinned and became a slave to sin, with Satan sort of being the personification in the literal embodiment of sin. He's the one that perpetuated it, that originated it, and drives sin forward. And another interesting parallel to this prince of, or king of Tyre, we see this also, this similar back and forth between the rulers of the earth and the angels behind them when we look at Daniel, starting at chapter 10, verse 13. This is Gabriel speaking to Daniel. He says, sort of explaining, hey, Daniel, sorry it took too long. I was very busy. He says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. With the kings of Persia. And granted, you had a Medo-Persian empire, and there could be multiple kings. They had like a couple at the same time, so can't read too much into it. But this concept of why is an angel, Gabriel, one of the strongest, greatest angels in heaven, having a hard time, and he's struggling with the prince of the kingdom of Persia. It really is consistent again with this idea that really he's struggling with the divine being who's pulling the strings behind the scenes of Persia. And Daniel 10:20, he says, do you know why I have come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. So that reference to the prince of Greece was talking about now Alexander the Great was going to show up. So there the prince was referring to human. But why is Gabriel having to contend with humans? It makes more sense also that it's divine beings in play here. And again, Michael Heiser agrees with that if you are avid follower of Michael Heiser. And this is building on the concepts of like Deuteronomy 32:8. It says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Some of them say sons of Israel, but when we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, they say sons of God, interestingly. And there's multiple ways to interpret sons of God. So there's a lot of reasonable debate amongst people about that. So just then to wrap it all up here, who is it? There is open for debate. Who is the one featured in Ezekiel chapter, I think we were talking about 28. Yeah, the king of Tyre could be a demon who's behind the scenes pulling the strings of Tyre, but I really believe it's speaking to who's the king of the great rebellion against God, and all the dots sort of connect to show that it is Satan himself. So exactly as you had said. So thank you for asking that question. Tina, anything you'd like to add?
So I've definitely studied Ezekiel 28 as well as Isaiah 14 a lot, because they are very similar, and they correlate with this description of a king like you see in Ezekiel 28, the king of Tyrus, but then it kind of like alludes to Satan, and I can't help but see in this it's like God is warning the king of Tyre, like, you're behaving like Satan. Satan was like this. He had this beginning where he got filled with pride because of his beauty, because of all this stuff he had. And, his end will be destruction. And it's a warning. In my mind, I see it as a warning to this king, like, hey, you don't even understand, but you are working on the side of Satan, and you need to, see yourself for who you really are. You do not reflect anything good. You reflect the enemy of all that is good, and you need to repent. And so when I see this, in Ezekiel 28, he's talking to the king, but he's likening him unto Satan. And I feel like the Bible does that a lot, where they allude, kings to different things, like to a tree, like we see Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4. He's likened to this tree. And I know there's another chapter where the king of Tyre, likened to a tree as well. And so there's all these different ways that God's trying to teach us a spiritual truth in a way that we'll understand. And so I guess what I see here too, it's definitely he's addressing the king of Tyre, but he's likening him to how Satan behaved, and giving a clear picture of why Satan is the way he is. It's because he, got puffed up because of his beauty, because of his splendor. And the king of Tyre is in the same exact situation, where he's at risk of becoming proud and ending in destruction, because we know in the Bible it says, pride goes before destruction. And so I guess when I look at these passages, I can't help but see kind of that mirroring, in a sense, as a warning towards this king.
And I think really what more seals that is the fact that we start off in Ezekiel 28 with speaking to the prince of Tyre, and then it sort of upgrades to the king of Tyre. Like, you are sort of in the image of your father, or your real ruler, who is this king of Tyre, is ruling behind the scenes.
Yeah. And it's very similar to what even Jesus said to the Pharisees. He's like, I know you guys think you guys are your father Abraham. He's like, but your father is the devil. And, he's, likens it in that way. And so
exactly. Yeah. It's that same sort of thing, which again, I noted, there's similar language there too, where it talks about how it says the king of Tyre was pretty much, violent from the beginning, or, way back when he's in heaven. And Jesus says, Satan was a murderer from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So, and again, is Jesus saying this to just, rip on you, or, is the Bible doing that? No, God's trying to warn you. And sometimes you need a serious warning. And, just like Jesus, when he said he was going to go to the cross, and Peter said, no, you're not going to go to the cross, suffer it not to be so. And Jesus says, I rebuke you, Satan. He says to Peter. And so, sometimes Jesus calls people Satan, or likens them to Satan, because they are being used by the devil. And you have to address sin as it is and call it by its right name, because people aren't even sometimes aware that they are being used by the enemy. And so it's, again, what I kind of see in this passage in Ezekiel chapter 28.
It's the spirit that works in us.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
And that's what we have to be mindful of, is the spirit that we're allowing to work in us the spirit of God, or is it not the spirit of God?
Yes.
Is it the spirit of the enemy? And anyone is, I think everybody is susceptible to that all the time. And, some people get really offended if someone is like, I don't think, that's not of the right spirit, but we should be able to discern the spirit and recognize when, what spirit it is that is working at any given time.
Yeah, for sure. And we have to judge that in ourselves too, I think, first and foremost.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I think that's so easy to be like, oh, they're such a bad person, they have bad spirit. It's like, oh, first look in the mirror.
Exactly.
We gotta take ourselves before we try and pluck a speck out of someone else's eye when we've got a log in our own. So 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.